What if the maid you humiliated in front of everyone turned out to be your own mother? Before we continue, please subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new video. One morning, as Clara sat in her golden chair sipping expensive tea, her driver Kofi approached her nervously. "Madam Clara," he said, bowing his head, "there is an old woman at the gate. She is looking for work as a maid." Clara wrinkled her nose in disgust. "An old woman? I don't want any smelly, dirty old beggar in my beautiful house." "But madam," Kofi continued carefully, "she says she will work for very little money. Just food and a place to sleep." Clara's eyes lit up with greed. If she could get a worker who would accept almost no payment, she would save a lot of money. "Bring her in," she said with an evil smile, "but make sure she knows her place." At the gate stood Mama Grace, a thin, elderly woman whose clothes were patched and worn. Her gray hair was covered with a faded headscarf, and her feet were wrapped in torn shoes that had walked many miles. She looked tired and hungry, but her eyes held a kindness that suffering had not been able to destroy. When Mama Grace was brought before Clara, she bowed respectfully, her old knees creaking as she lowered herself. "So you want to work in my house?" Clara said, looking at her like she was examining a broken piece of furniture. "Yes, madam," Mama Grace replied softly. "I will work very hard for you. I just need food and somewhere to sleep." Clara laughed cruelly. "You will scrub my floors, wash my clothes, cook my meals, and clean every corner of this house. You will sleep in the corridor like a dog, eat only leftover food, and speak only when I tell you to speak. If you make any mistake, I will punish you. Do you accept these conditions?" Mama Grace's heart ached, but she needed work desperately. "Yes, madam. I accept." And so began the darkest chapter of both their lives. From the very first day, Clara made Mama Grace's life a living hell. She forced the old woman to scrub the marble floors on her hands and knees until her back ached terribly. When Mama Grace's old knees began to bleed from the hard stone, Clara just laughed. "Look at your ugly, torn shoes." Clara would mock, pointing at Mama Grace's feet. "You are so poor you can't even afford proper shoes. How disgusting." At mealtimes, Clara would eat delicious food, roasted chicken, fried rice, fresh vegetables, and sweet fruits, while Mama Grace was given only the scraps left on the plates. Sometimes Clara would eat slowly just to watch the old woman wait hungrily beside her. "You can eat when I'm finished," Clara would say, knowing the food would be cold and tasteless by then. Mama Grace never complained. She worked from sunrise to sunset, cleaning, cooking, and serving without a word of protest. But late at night, when everyone was asleep, she would lie on her thin mat in the cold corridor and cry silently into her old pillow. The other workers in the house whispered among themselves about Clara's wickedness. "She is so cruel to that old woman," said Mary, the cook. "It's not right," agreed Samuel, the gardener. "No one should treat an elder that way." But they were all too afraid of losing their jobs to say anything to Clara directly. They could only watch in horror as their mistress became more and more heartless each day. One particularly hot afternoon, Clara decided to humiliate Mama Grace in front of the other workers. "Old woman," she shouted, "come here immediately." Mama Grace hurried over, her old legs shaking with exhaustion. "Look at this floor," Clara said, pointing to a tiny speck of dust. "You call this clean? Get down and scrub it again with your bare hands." As Mama Grace got on her knees once more, Clara turned to the other workers. "This is what happens when you hire lazy old beggars. They can't do anything right." The workers looked away in shame, but Mama Grace continued scrubbing, her tears mixing with the water on the floor. 3 months after Mama Grace arrived, Clara received a visit from her Aunt Patricia, the woman who had raised her since she was a baby. Patricia was a kind, gentle lady who had always tried to teach Clara good values, though she had not succeeded very well. When Patricia walked into the mansion and saw Mama Grace sweeping the stairs, she stopped suddenly and stared. Her face went pale, and her hands began to shake. "Clara," she called urgently, "who is that woman?" "Oh, that's just my new maid," Clara replied carelessly. "I call her old woman because I don't waste time learning servants' names." Patricia watched Mama Grace carefully, her heart beating fast. There was something very familiar about the old woman, something that made her feel nervous and guilty. "Clara, dear," Patricia said gently, "perhaps you should treat her more kindly. She looks frail and tired." Clara burst out laughing. "Aunt Patricia, you're too soft-hearted. She's just a servant. If I'm too nice to her, she'll become lazy and useless." Patricia wanted to say more, but something held her back. A secret she had kept for 30 years, a promise she had made long ago, and a truth she wasn't ready to reveal. That same week, Michael, a successful businessman who had been trying to court Clara for months, came to visit. Michael was handsome and wealthy, but more importantly, he had a kind heart that Clara found both attractive and annoying. As he sat with Clara in her beautiful garden, he noticed Mama Grace struggling to carry heavy buckets of water. "Clara," he said, standing up to help the old woman, "let me assist her." "Sit down." Clara snapped. "Don't you dare help that lazy old beggar. She needs to learn to work harder." Michael ignored Clara and helped Mama Grace carry the water. The old woman looked at him with grateful tears. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. "You have a good heart." When Michael returned to Clara, his face was serious. "Clara, I've been watching you and I don't like what I see. You treat people terribly, especially those who are poor and helpless." Clara's eyes flashed with anger. "How dare you lecture me about my own servants? If you don't like how I run my house, you can leave." "Maybe I will," Michael said sadly. "I thought you were a good woman underneath all that pride, but I'm starting to think I was wrong." Clara laughed bitterly. "Fine. I don't need you or anyone else. I am perfectly happy alone with my money and my beautiful things." But deep inside, Clara felt a small pain in her heart. She pushed it away and became even crueler to Mama Grace, as if punishing the old woman would make her feel better. While Clara slept peacefully in her soft bed every night, Mama Grace lay awake on the hard floor, staring at the ceiling and remembering better days. When she was sure everyone was asleep, she would take out her most precious possession, a small, golden locket that she kept hidden in her old dress. Inside the locket was a picture of a beautiful baby girl with bright eyes and a tiny hand that had a distinctive birthmark shaped like a star. Mama Grace would kiss the picture and whisper prayers. "My beautiful daughter," she would say softly, "wherever you are, I hope you are happy and safe. I hope you have forgiven me for leaving you. I never stopped loving you, not for a single day." Sometimes, when Clara's cruelty was particularly harsh, Mama Grace would have strange feelings, as if she knew this young woman from somewhere long ago. There was something about Clara's eyes, the way she moved her hands, even the shape of her face that seemed familiar. But the memories were too painful and too old, and Mama Grace convinced herself it was just her imagination playing tricks on her mind. On the loneliest nights, Mama Grace would remember the day that changed her life forever. She had been young then, maybe Clara's age, but desperately poor and very sick. She had held her baby daughter in her arms, knowing she could not provide for her. "I'm not abandoning you," she had whispered to her infant child. "I'm giving you a chance at a better life. Someone with money will love you and give you everything I cannot." It was the hardest decision she had ever made, and not a day had passed without regret. She had spent 30 years searching for her daughter, but the woman who promised to care for the child had moved far away, and the trail had gone cold. Now, as she served this cruel young woman, Mama Grace wondered if her own daughter was somewhere in the world, happy and loved, or if she too had become hard and heartless like Clara. "God," she prayed, "let my daughter be kinder than this woman. Let her have a good heart, even if she never forgives me for leaving her." Clara's reputation for cruelty spread throughout the neighborhood, but she didn't care. If anything, she seemed proud of being feared and talked about. One evening, Clara decided to throw a party for her wealthy friends. She wanted to show off her beautiful house and expensive things. The mansion was decorated with flowers and lights, and the finest food was prepared. As the guests arrived in their fancy cars and expensive clothes, Clara felt like a queen receiving her subjects. She wore her most beautiful dress and her most expensive jewelry. During the party, one of the guests accidentally spilt wine on the floor. Without thinking, Clara shouted across the room, "Old woman, get over here and clean this mess immediately." Mama Grace hurried over with a cloth and began cleaning the spill while the guests watched. Clara, wanting to impress her friends, began speaking loudly. "This is my maid," she announced. "I found her begging at my gate like a dirty old dog. Look at her torn clothes and ugly shoes. She's probably never owned anything nice in her entire useless life." The guests laughed uncomfortably, but Clara continued. "Poor people like her are so lazy and stupid. That's why they have nothing and we have everything." Mama Grace continued cleaning, her face burning with shame, but she didn't say a word. Michael, who had been invited to the party, watched this scene with horror and disgust. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly on the floor. "Clara," he said in a voice that everyone could hear, "I came here tonight hoping to ask you to marry me. But after seeing how you treat this poor old woman, I realize I could never love someone with such a cruel heart." The room fell silent. Clara's face turned red with embarrassment and anger. "You will regret this, Michael," she shouted. No one embarrasses me in my own house. But Michael was already walking toward the door. Before leaving, he turned back one more time. Clara, you are beautiful on the outside, but your heart is ugly. Until you learn to treat people with kindness, you will never know true happiness. After Michael left, the other guests began making excuses to leave as well. Soon, Clara was alone with her servants, humiliated and furious. This is all your fault, she screamed at Mama Grace. If you weren't so ugly and pathetic, Michael wouldn't have been disgusted. That night, Aunt Patricia called Clara on the telephone. I heard about what happened at your party, Patricia said sadly. Clara, I'm warning you, one day the poor people you despise will be your downfall. Treat others the way you want to be treated. Clara laughed bitterly. Spare me your lectures, Aunt Patricia. I don't need anyone's advice. I am perfectly fine on my own. But as she hung up the phone, Clara felt more alone than ever before. Weeks passed, and Clara became even more bitter and cruel after Michael's rejection. She took out all her anger and frustration on Mama Grace, making the old woman's life more miserable than ever. One terrible morning, Clara woke up to find that her biggest business deal had failed. She had lost a lot of money, and several of her wealthy friends were gossiping about her cruel behavior at the party. Her reputation was damaged, and she was facing more financial problems than she had ever experienced. Feeling angry and desperate, Clara stormed through the house looking for someone to blame. She found Mama Grace in the kitchen, quietly preparing breakfast. You! Clara screamed. Everything is your fault. Ever since you came to this house, my life has been falling apart. Madam, I don't understand, Mama Grace said softly. What have I done wrong? What have you done wrong? Clara repeated, her voice getting higher and more vicious. You exist. You ugly, useless old woman. I'm sick of looking at your pathetic face every day. In her rage, Clara grabbed Mama Grace's small bag, the only personal belongings the old woman owned, and threw it across the kitchen with all her strength. The bag hit the wall and burst open, spilling everything onto the floor. Old, patched clothes scattered everywhere. A golden locket. The locket flew across the room and hit the corner of a cabinet. It popped open, and out fell a small photograph and an old, yellowed paper. Clara, still breathing heavily from her anger, walked over to see what had fallen out. She picked up the photograph and looked at it. Her heart stopped. It was a picture of a baby, a beautiful baby girl with bright eyes and a tiny hand clearly visible. On that tiny hand was a birthmark shaped like a star. Clara's own hand began to shake as she looked down at her own palm. There on her own hand was the exact same star-shaped birthmark. With trembling fingers, she picked up the yellowed paper. It was old and torn, but she could still read the words written in faded ink. Birth certificate, baby girl, born to Grace Mensa, father unknown. And there, in the space for the baby's name, were the words that made Clara's world collapse. Clara Mensa. The room began to spin. Clara's legs felt weak, and she had to hold onto the cabinet to keep from falling. No, she whispered. No, this can't be real. This is impossible. Mama Grace, seeing her locket and papers scattered on the floor, crawled over and began gathering them with tears in her eyes. Please, madam, she begged, those are my most precious things. My only memories of my daughter who I lost long ago. But Clara wasn't listening. She was staring at the old woman, as if seeing her for the first time. The shape of her eyes, the curve of her nose, the way she moved her hands. What is your full name? Clara asked, her voice barely a whisper. Mama Grace looked up, confused by the question. My name is Grace Mensa, madam. Clara fell to her knees. Grace Mensa, she repeated in a voice that didn't sound like her own. And the baby in this picture, the baby with my birthmark, is named Clara Mensa. Mama Grace stopped gathering her scattered belongings and looked up at Clara with growing confusion and fear. Madam, I don't understand why you're asking these questions, she said softly. Tell me, Clara screamed, and both women jumped at the intensity of her voice. Just at that moment, Aunt Patricia arrived for one of her usual visits. She walked into the kitchen and froze when she saw the scene. Clara on her knees, Mama Grace crying, and the contents of an old locket spread across the floor. Patricia's face went completely white. She knew that locket. She had seen it 30 years ago. Grace. Patricia whispered, her voice barely audible. Grace, is that really you? Mama Grace looked up and saw Patricia for the first time in decades. The truth hit Clara like a physical blow. She looked back and forth between the two women, the elegant aunt who had raised her and the poor old maid she had been tormenting. Aunt Patricia, Clara said in a voice that was barely human, tell me this isn't true. Tell me this old woman is not my mother. Patricia's shoulders sagged as 30 years of carrying a secret finally became too heavy to bear. I can't tell you that, Clara, she said, tears streaming down her face. Because it would be a lie. Grace came to me 30 years ago, Patricia continued, her voice shaking. She was very young, very sick, and very poor. She had no money for food, no money for medicine, and no way to take care of a baby. She was dying, Clara. She brought you to me because she loved you too much to watch you suffer with her. Mama Grace nodded through her tears. I begged Patricia to give you everything I couldn't, she whispered. A good home, good food, education, a chance at a beautiful life. I hoped that when you grew up, you would understand why I had to leave you. But why didn't you tell me? Clara demanded, looking at Patricia. Why didn't you tell me the truth? Patricia wiped her eyes. I planned to tell you when you were older. But when Grace came looking for you 5 years later, you were so happy, so settled in your new life. You called me Mama, and you had everything you needed. Grace saw how well you were doing, and she made me promise not to tell you the truth unless you asked. She said she didn't want to confuse you or make you feel obligated to love her. Clara turned to look at Mama Grace, who was still kneeling on the floor, gathering her precious belongings. You came looking for me? Clara asked. I never stopped looking for you, Mama Grace replied. When I finally found you, you were about 10 years old. You were so beautiful, so smart, and so happy. Patricia had given you everything I dreamed you would have. I watched you from far away sometimes, and I was grateful. Even though my heart was breaking, I was grateful that you had a good life. So why are you here now? Why did you come to work for me? Mama Grace looked up with eyes full of love and pain. Because I'm old now and am dying. I just wanted to spend my last days near you, even if you never knew who I was. I just wanted to take care of you one more time, the way I couldn't when you were a baby. Clara stared at this woman, her mother, who had scrubbed floors on bleeding knees just to be near her. I treated my own mother like a slave. The weight of her cruelty crashed down on Clara all at once. She began to sob, deep, painful sobs that came from the very depths of her soul. Mama, she cried, using the word for the first time in 30 years. Mama, what have I done? What kind of monster am I? Word of the shocking revelation spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Servants talked, neighbors gossiped, and soon everyone knew the incredible story. Clara, the proud, wealthy woman who looked down on poor people, had been cruelly mistreating her own mother. The same people who had once feared Clara now whispered about her with a mixture of shock and satisfaction. Did you hear? Said one neighbor. That cruel woman Clara was being served by her own mother all this time. I always said her pride would be her downfall. Clara couldn't leave her house without people staring and pointing. Former friends avoided her calls. Business associates found excuses not to meet with her. The woman who had once been the envy of everyone was now the subject of pity and disgust. But the worst part wasn't the public shame. The worst part was the memories that came flooding back. Late at night, Clara would remember fragments of her early childhood, before Patricia became her only mother. Michael heard about the revelation through mutual friends. One evening, he came to Clara's house, but not to comfort her. I came to see if it was true, he said when Clara answered the door. Her eyes were red from crying, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. It's true, Clara whispered. That old woman I treated so terribly, she's my mother. Michael shook his head sadly. Clara, I thought your heart was just proud and spoiled. I never imagined it could be this cold. How do you mistreat your own mother? I didn't know. Clara protested. If I had known, I never would have. But that's exactly the problem, Michael interrupted. You treated her badly because you thought she was just a poor old woman with no value. If you had known she was your mother, you would have treated her well. That means you only show kindness to people who are important to you. What about kindness for everyone, just because they're human? Clara had no answer. Michael was right, and they both knew it. I could have loved you, Michael said quietly. But I could never marry a woman who could be so cruel to anyone, let alone her own mother. You need to learn what love really means before you can love anyone else. After Michael left, Clara went to find Mama Grace. She found her in the corridor where she still slept, even though Clara had offered her a proper bedroom. The old woman was looking at her locket again. Mama, Clara said softly. Mama Grace looked up with eyes that held no anger, only sadness. I'm so sorry, Clara whispered. I'm sorry for every cruel word, every slap. Every night, I made you sleep on this cold floor. I'm sorry for 30 years of not looking for you. I'm sorry for becoming the kind of person who could hurt someone so badly. Mama Grace reached out and touched Clara's face gently. My daughter, I forgave you the moment I saw you again. A mother's love doesn't die just because her heart is broken. But how can you forgive me? How can you still love me after everything I've done? Because Mama Grace said simply, you are my child, and a mother loves her child no matter what. The stress and shock of the revelation took a terrible toll on both women, but especially on Mama Grace. Her already frail body, weakened by years of hardship and months of cruel treatment, began to fail. She developed a bad cough that wouldn't go away. She could barely eat, and she slept most of the day. Clara, terrified of losing her mother again, called the best doctors in the city. But it was too late. The years of poverty, malnutrition, and recent stress had damaged Mama Grace's health beyond repair. I'm afraid there isn't much we can do, the doctor told Clara privately. Her heart is very weak, and her lungs are damaged at her age, and given her condition, she probably has only a few weeks left. Clara felt like the world was ending. She had found her mother only to lose her again, and this time it would be forever. She moved Mama Grace into the most beautiful bedroom in the mansion, the master bedroom with silk sheets and a view of the garden. She hired nurses to care for her around the clock. She bought the finest food and medicine money could buy. But Mama Grace was getting weaker every day. One evening, as Clara sat beside her mother's bed, Mama Grace took her hand. My daughter, she said in a voice that was barely a whisper, I need to tell you something important. Don't talk, Mama. Save your strength. No, I need to say this before it's too late. Mama Grace squeezed Clara's hand with what little strength she had left. I don't want you to spend your life feeling guilty about how you treated me. But I should feel guilty. I was terrible to you. Help is if you learn from this and become a better person. Clara was crying again. She seemed to cry constantly now. I don't know how to be better, Mama. I've been proud and cruel for so long. I don't know how to change. Start by helping other people the way you should have helped me, Mama Grace said. Use your money and your life to help them. I will, Mama. I promise I will. And Clara? Mama Grace's voice was getting fainter. Learn to forgive yourself. I forgave you completely. Now you must forgive yourself so you can move forward. 3 days later, as the sun was rising over the garden she had loved to look at, Mama Grace closed her eyes and went peacefully to sleep forever. Clara held her hand until the end.